We're not stupid enough to think that we're the bosses.
Is Dale coming?
We think he's supposed to be here, yeah.
Oh,
We don't know whether he's
might be something to do with Air New Zealand.
Could be.
He was flying in this morning, so.
Where was he coming from?
Oh, I think might. Well, it depends whether the plane and all. Must have been a nightmare. There was something like 1,400 flights.
Trapped with weather, it was 100 or something.
So they would have, yeah, they would have.
They might have closed Auckland again, who knows?
It is. Yeah, just in your backyard. But in the nice, how many houses?
Venetia.
One big factory and a lot of houses.
We believe.
Train spotter.
Train spotter.
Thousands wouldn't.
We've had a few other.
Check that posture chair.
No, no. Are you ready to rock and roll? We are. Thank you, Juanita. Take it away.
Tina ra tata katoa, atua kia amo kia katoa I tēnei ata I rongi te kāna o tēnei te whakawhiri whakaaro, whakawhai huarahi I moe I tēnei kaunihira o te kaunihira o te rohe o Taranaki, tēnā tata. Tuaki au I mawana I te pōtai o te komihana I mihi ana kia koutou, ko tā mai I tēnei ata. Ahakoa I mihi anō, au anō I ahau, nui te mihi o ēnei aku huamahi aku tuahine o te komi. Te maunga, kia koe David, Steve, me o kaimahi, ngā kai councillors o te kaunihira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mihi anō hoki kia koe Neil, tō tainga mai I tēnei ata. I tō raro I te maru o tō pōtaitanga o te mea o tēnei rohi, nau mai hara mai tēnā koutou. Nui te mihi anō kia EJ, rau ko Donald ko tai mai tēnei ata ki te tautoko I tēnei kaupapa nō reira. Me tuku mihi aroha, me tuku mihi hohonu, me tuku mihi pono anō kia tātou I tēnei ata. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, kia ora. Kia ora tātou. It is so wonderful to be here with you today. And sorry, yes, I'm going to. Haven't forgotten. It's really good. Sue keeps me on my toes. So it's the small and important little pleasures in a COVID world, such as being able to meet face to face, and also with the delightful weather we've had. That has made it a little bit of a challenge to be with you today. So we're absolutely thrilled that we are. And we're just going to start with a very special prayer that comes from Taranaki, Benita told us. So we expect you to be in full and fulsome voice and to do us proud in this wonderful place in which you live. Thank you. Right, so we'll start us, Sue.
Una here. Well, I didn't know I was doing this.
Well, we'll do it together. Here it is.
Next, sorry, everybody. Let's start again.
Whakataka te hau ki uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tohanga. Kia mā te kinga ki rotu. Kia mā taratata ki ta. Kia mā te ata. Te teo, te hua, te hau, te he mā.
No problem. So we acknowledge mana whenua of the rohi that we are now considering, and we acknowledge iwi and hapu of this land, and we also acknowledge that we are entering your very special place. A special hello to Chairman David McLeod, Deputy Chair Michael, CEO Steve and all your staff, and a big hello to Mayor Neil as well. Lovely to have you here today. And if I could just do some introductions. So we have, just making sure I'm keeping to my little bit. So we have Donald Rebos, who is just sitting here, and he is our walking encyclopedia of all knowledge local government. What we would do without him, I don't know. And then we've got the very talented EJ Ruthven. Where is she gone? Oh, here she is, sorry. And she is our lead advisor on this representation review today. So we're thrilled to have them. I'll get Sue Piper, I'm sure, who needs no introduction, to just give you a brief introduction of herself.
Well, it's Mario kia ora koutou. Well, of course, I'm a Wellingtonian, so we've got connections with this rohi too, with Te Atiawa connections. I'm a member of the Local Government Commission, and I have served on the Wellington City Council feels like a couple of decades ago. Before climate change, I was lucky, and when there was lots of money. So I'm delighted to be back in Taranaki. I learned to ride a bike in Hawara, on that hill, you know, where the bacon factory was. And my cousin Gerard Jura, who's a very prominent lawyer in the Hutt Valley now, he managed to make sure that the brakes failed when I was halfway down. And I was terrified because I'd only just learned to ride a bike that week in Hawara. And I was terrified, but fortunately I managed to grip so tightly because I knew if I got to the bottom and then I'd go back up the hill and I'd stop. And do you know those childhood memories you have? And it's always exaggerated. Well, I went and looked at that hill about 5 years ago, and it's as big and steep as it was when I was at it. So that's my connection with the rohi.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm sure most of you know I'm Janie in the year, and I was just counting up this morning, and I was shocked to see that I've had 25 years in a local government experience. I was, of course, 5 when I was first elected to the Tamu District Council, and I had 9 years as councillor and 9 years as mayor as well, and I've had 7 years as a local government commissioner, so I've been incredibly lucky. Now, just to let everyone know, our beloved Commissioner Benita, she has declared an interest for obvious reasons today. So she is just a member of the public watching, and she has seen none of the information at all that isn't publicly available to do with the hearing today, and she will take no part in any decision making. So just to clarify that for you all. Okay, so the format for the morning, the Regional Council will have a half an hour-ish to present to us and answer some questions, and then we'll take a break at approximately sort of about 10:15-ish, just depending on how we go. And then we will hear from Paola Lawrence and Emily Bailey, and then we will have a break, and then we'll ask the Regional Council to come back with their right of reply, which we'll look forward to it. So just to let you know that we may play devil's advocate. So even though we're asking questions that may indicate to you that we're going down a certain line, it's not that we've made any decisions or we're even thinking about it, but we do need to ask lots of questions so that we understand that the implications of any decision that we might make. So I just want to let you know that we haven't a preconceived view at all, and we will ask those tricky questions. So please don't think that we've already made up our mind, because Sue and I, it's very rarely that we totally agree right up front about anything. All right, so we'll be making a decision by the 11th of April as required by the legislation, and we may make it before that date. And this, of course, will be made public and be available on our website. So I think we're ready to go. Is there anything I have forgotten, team? Oh, all right.
What was the emergency?
The live stream is not currently accessible for everyone, so we can share recordings afterwards if that's
Okay. Thank you very much.
Do we know?
And everyone know, and if there's an emergency, we We run like hell.
If you hear the evacuation sirens go off, and they will sound like our fire alarms, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit, which is either through the back of the room here, or you can go down the stairs and out through the cafeteria. The collection point is, and hopefully we don't have one of these today because it could be quite wet, is in front of what we call the bird cage, which is the shed type area is beside the reception area. Toilets and facilities down the stairs and to your right, and there is accessible gents and ladies toilets there to your right. Down there, tea and coffee at the end here. Help yourself at any stage during the day, but there's also the cafeteria is down the steps and to your left, and there's also water just tucked in behind here. So please make yourself welcome to use facilities at any stage.
Thank you very much. Very flash. I haven't been to many councils that have actually got a cafeteria.
Old school.
Nothing wrong with old school, may I say. Thank you very much. Okay. Who's going to lead us today? David?
I think I have that
Thank
pleasure.
you. Well, that will be wonderful.
No, me te tuatai, tēnā kura, tēnā koutou katoa o tō rōpū. Nau mahara mai ki tēnei rohi o Taranaki. It's a pleasure for me to formally welcome you to our rohe here and all that. And thank you for your warm greetings to us as well. So as you mentioned, I am the chairman of the Taranaki Regional Council, and beside me we clearly have our CEO Steve Ruru and also our Director of Corporate Affairs Mike Neild. We were anticipating having Dale Sosky here as well to assist with any technical detail that you may wish to grab from us, because he played an important part within the process that we ran as well, to make sure that we kept on track with the boundaries that clearly there are amongst the Electoral Act that we had to follow.
If there's anything technical and Dale can't make it, we can always, we won't be making a decision straight away. So we can always, get the guys to have a chat to him and just find out anything that we need. So
I'm making a big assumption here, but I'm pretty confident that Mike Neild is very, very skilled and very experienced in the space as well. So we'll see how we go with that.
Thank you.
Also, it would be remiss of me not to mention my fellow councillors that are with us today as well.
Oh, sorry, and I apologise as well.
No problem at all. So I'll just mention them. We've got Neil Walker and Donald McIntyre and Elvisa Vanderlyn at the back there, who have come along. They
Lovely, good on you.
This is an important occasion for us. And of course, recognise our Mayor of Stratford, Neil Volksky, who I'm sure he's here to make sure we behave ourselves and make sure his mentoring of me is working fine. So we'll see how that goes. Today, this is a very important decision that's to be made. It is a decision that clearly provides the basis, the foundation for how this council here is represented at a governance level for the work, the mahi, the mandate that we have as a council type thing. So just a little background with my experience. I've been on the council since the year 2000, and I've been the chair since 2007. So I've been here far too long. And we as a council do take the responsibility of representation very seriously. And I'm confident that the process that we ran was a strong process, and that there is to be tested, I suggest, along this hearing itself. But we involved technical people such as Dale, as I mentioned before, because there's clearly boundaries that we need to understand and detail that we need to consider in making sure that we're making the best possible decision as a council. So to speak. So we did have a good amount of expertise around us with regards to that. I'd also like to say that we had, welcome Dale. Travel problems, was it Dale? Was it that you Please come forward.
My colleague just muttered, "Speak of the devil."
Thank you. And I'm sure Dale needs no introduction to you because exactly he's been a busy man over the last year with all of these reviews that he's been partaking in for many different councils. So we had a lot of key matters that we took into consideration, and quite appropriately so. And just some of those to mention at this particular point in time, the likes of the size of our region, our strategic priorities, the likes of the workloads that we have amongst our governance here at the council, care, geographical representation, all of the bullet points, you might say, that one should take into account. And Steve will take us through a short slideshow and expand upon that itself. There was, I consider, a great debate amongst the councillors, and we did have good submissions made to the council presenting, as you'd imagine, various points of view. And clearly one of the points of view that a number of the submitters brought forward was the point that you are probably hearing upon today about the fact of the 11 people representation versus the 13, and also importantly, one Māori representative versus two type scenario. And I can tell you that was robustly debated amongst the councillors subsequent to the hearing process that we ran. And I think I could say that robust debate presents a sort of the optics, or that should I say, it presents the case that serious consideration was given to the many options that we took into it. It did refine itself down to those two particular options of the 11 versus 13. And as I'm sure Dale and Mike would attest to, is that there were other options that we looked at as well. But we are a creature of statute with regards to the Local Government Act and the boundaries of which we can work within. I'd like to make a statement that the system is not perfect. The outcomes will not be perfect, but the endeavour is to get the best outcome you possibly can within the boundaries of which we're actually presented in front of us type scenario. So some other areas that I'd like to discuss briefly prior to handing on to the CEO is that we do have iwi representatives on our council committee structure. Our two, what I would call our two main committees of the policy and planning and consensus regulatory, do have three Māori representatives on each of those committees. And you might ask the reason where three is actually prescribed in legislation, but it's also a fit of three to the three waka of the main waka of the Taranaki iwi. So the 8 iwi that are within our region, which I believe that Steve's got a slide that will show you that situation. There are the three primary waka that Māoridom felt was a fitting way of providing representation, given the fact that it is three representatives at the committee, not 8, which is the number of iwi that we have type scenario. Those representatives have been included in what I would call the pre-workshops building up to the process that we ran more publicly. It was good debate there, and it debated the 13 and 11 as we're looking at today in those initial workshops with strong debate was held at that level. But I think it's fair to say after that first initial workshop, there was a bit of a consensus that we shall go out for submissions with a straw man of the 11-person council, with the one Māori representative was the result of those workshops itself. But of course, subsequent to that, we ran an open process, and as you're doing here, Madam Chair, we are open-minded to what other feedback we get to take into account with the decision that we ultimately come up with. So with that sort of a brief introduction, and like I say, Steve will be doing a presentation, and any questions, we'll have a bit of a tag team here amongst us with regards to that. So I'll hand it over to Steve now. Thank you.
Is it possible to have a copy so that we can make notes on it?
We'll give you copies.
Great, thanks.
Later we'll get them off for you, so I didn't think about that. So kia ora, and thank you for the opportunity to present this. Just again, for completeness, I think some of you are probably aware, but this is the 4th council at which I've been chief executive. So I have a range of perspectives that I bring to Taranaki and this consideration, this particular issue with those experiences, primarily at TIAs, but from one end of the country to the other. That again, I think it's helpful as we move into debates about our representation, certainly fed into the review process that council's been through. So first thing there, just giving an overview of Taranaki. Taranaki, of course, is the smallest of the regional councils in New Zealand by quite some way physically. Is a reasonably compact region where, and indeed is considerably smaller than just about all the TIAs, which I've worked just to put it in perspective. In terms of travel time from one end of the region to the other, just over 2 hours. It's not large. And as I said, the TIAs that I've been in have more than double that travel time to travel across. A population of 124,000, a big 70% of it based around New Plymouth district in the northern part of the region. And of course, important to recognise in terms of the electoral populations, 12% Māori out of the total regional population that we have to work with. So that's important in terms of context, in terms of understanding, particularly with the work of regional councils having a strong environmental focus to understand some of that context. As Chair David has just talked about, 8 iwi that cover the Taranaki region, and they do tend to group within the 3 waka for a number of representatives on a number of bodies across the region, including our 2 main committees. So that's just there for completeness. And again, important in terms of understanding the particular issues that we as a regional council understand. Again, I think useful to recognise, effectively there's the hill country, which is a big part of the physical part of the area, and indeed, 40% of the region is in national park or bush, etc., and reserves. And then obviously the main population centres based around New Plymouth and the volcanic ring plain and the Monga, obviously dominating the physical features of the region as a whole. In terms of our current representation structure, and it's not dissimilar, we currently have 11 councillors, 5 out of New Plymouth constituency, which is predominantly the sort of expanded urban area of the city, 2 members in the North Taranaki constituency, which makes up the rest of the New Plymouth district, 1 in Stratford, and currently 3 in the South Taranaki constituency, which you see the boundaries there. In terms of, so given the population requirements under the Electoral Act, obviously the city tends to dominate in terms of the number of councillors collected for the current representation structure, and obviously is also reflected going forward. In terms of the process we've been through, council made the decision to establish or to create a Māori constituency in April. And prior to making that decision, went through a community consultation process to get feedback on it. It would be fair to say it was pretty evenly balanced feedback coming back out of the community, with 55% of the submissions being in support of the establishment of Māori constituency and 45% saying, no, you shouldn't do it. Council made the decision to establish the Māori constituency, and hence the need for the representation review that we are here today. But as I said, certainly a pretty balanced feedback came through that community consultation process. We then went through a series of workshops, which Dale provided, in fact, led and provided significant input into, as Chair David has said, including the 6 iwi representatives that were on our committees were invited to those, and indeed they made some very useful and valuable contributions to the debate that occurred at those workshops as we briefed councillors on the range of options that were available and the legislative construct within which decisions need to be made. Range of options were put forward from 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 councils, and the pros and cons of that range of options was again subject to some pretty robust debate and discussion around the table. And obviously that was also well canvassed and fed into the ultimately the adoption of the formal decision-making process in July 21, where council adopted its initial proposal to run with the 11 councillors, as was discussed at those workshops. I went through the formal process, notification process, with hearings being held in August. 14 submissions received, 4 arguing for Tū Māori, or effectively arguing for 13 councillors. It wasn't quite portrayed as that, as the discussion being 11 versus 13, but was very much a debate that was advocated around there should be more Māori councillors or constituencies, rather than necessarily grappling with the big issue about, which is of course the piece we need to grapple with in legislation, is what's the right number of councillors that we should have, given the size of the region, what effective representation might look like, and the range of strategic issues that we face as a region. So there were 4 submissions arguing for that, one arguing for rural representation, and 5 that were out of scope. In fact, there were submissions, for example, still opposing the establishment of a Māori constituency that came in through that process. But of course, it was too late by that stage. Council had already made the decision.
Can I just contribute to the, please, Steve? I think it's important to understand is that the 11 model that we went out for public consultation with, the reason why there's a rural rep sort of identified there in one of the submissions was the fact that the 11 saw the reduction in one of the rural constituencies. So the South Taranaki constituency went from 3 down to 2. And that's was a strong representation that they wanted to have geographical, meaning more rural representation, and not losing that weighting. Sorry.
And then obviously the final proposal was adopted, and again, as Chair David has talked about, after some very robust debate and consideration of the paper at the September meeting, and indeed councillors asked for the 2 options to be brought back into following the hearings, to be put in the paper that they had, one dealing with the option of 11 councillors and one dealing with 13. So again, those 2 options were there very clearly in the paper that was before the council at the time, before it made its decision on its final proposal, and was, as I said, very well debated and discussed at that meeting. This again, you'll be familiar with this table, just outlining the final proposal and the split between the constituencies. The 4 general constituencies, and obviously the Taranaki Māori constituency at the bottom there. In terms of the rationale for the decision, again, I think a critical factor in this was about what's an appropriate level of representation for Taranaki, given the size of the region, the spread of the population, with 70% located effectively in the main urban area of New Plymouth, and the range of strategic issues that we faced. And there was a level of concern about going to 13 would effectively give you over-representation, too many, and obviously council workloads, and what's the right level, that number that you need, given the geographical spread, as I said, relatively small, compact region, easy to get around, and indeed here in Stratford's very centrally located. It's basically no much more than an hour to go and get anywhere around the region from Stratford. That was a key concern. And certainly, again, my experience has been that you need councillors with significant workloads, because elected members come into councils to try and make a difference. So that's critically important in terms of the decision-making process that was gone through. In terms of the Māori and rural representation issues, we do notice, as Chair David talked about, we have in legislation requirement to have 3 iwi representatives on our Consent and Regulatory Committee, 3 on our Policy and Planning Committee, and we also have a statutory requirement to form a Waitara River Committee, which has to have 5 iwi hapu representatives on it. That cannot be changed because it's enshrined in legislation, so we'll need legislative change to change that level of representation. We also have on our Policy and Planning Committee a Federated Farmers representative, and indeed 3 representatives from the different TLAs. So quite wide representation built into the committee structure. And one thing about this council is that the committees are its workhorse, far more than any council I've ever seen before, that makes very effective use, in my view, of its committee structure ensures the council stays focused on its core role as providing that governance and high-level leadership role for the region, and relying on the advice that comes through from its committees as it goes through its workload. The other piece that also fed into that is they asked for and we provide them with, based on the current representation model and obviously 2020 population, some comparisons with the other regional councils around New Zealand. And you see there in the likes of Northland and Hawke's Bay regions with significantly greater populations, nearly 3 times the physical size of Taranaki, that in fact currently have 2 less councillors than we have. And obviously, as I said, physical size seems to me anyway a relevant determinant of the issues of the work of a regional council and the size and nature of those issues. So that again was a factor that fed into the discussion of the consideration about what's the appropriate level of representation for a regional council covering a region of this size and with the population that we have. So look, that's the high-level overview of the process we've been through. As we've said, certainly in my view, a very robust process that was run and reflected the completeness of the governance structure we have, with the committees doing the bulk of the work and to feed up to council when necessary where it gets outside of the delegations, and also reflecting the fact that we do have strong iwi and indeed we have current rural representation built into our committee structure. So we're happy to hand back to Chair David just to sum up anything else.
I'm just thinking it was remiss of me also not to recognise Benita and Emily, because they are 2 of our iwi reps on our council committees, and we're lucky, fortunate to have very engaged Māori representation. I think it's fair to say it is a developing relationship. They are in the context of local government relatively new positions. And it's one of our, I'd call it one of our work streams, is to get the most out of the value of what that representation provides as well. So I wanted to acknowledge Benita and Emily with regards to that as well. But yeah, I think that, in summary, we feel we've run a strong process. It was not what someone might class as a rubber stamping exercise. It clearly was not that. It was a situation where there was robust debate, and I'd look to my councillors to attest to that. And I'd also suggest that it be noted that that robust debate did not lead to a unanimous decision. It was a split decision, but this council made the decision democratically, and that the 11 person council with the 1 Māori representative was the decision made by this council. So yeah, I think with that, happy to receive any questions or any points of clarity you may have.
Thank you, David.
So just a couple of questions just in terms of the information in the presentation, and thanks for that.
Can you hear Sue all right at the back?
Is my lights going on?
Please,
I think I was talking to the table. Sorry. Just a couple of questions, or about 3 questions about content in the PowerPoint presentation, which was very helpful. Thank you very much. 3 waka, they cover just. No, I know that, but which of the iwi fit? We're on which waka?
So the Aotea, basically the South Taranaki. I should actually ask our cultural advisor like Benita to actually do this, or Emily. But correct me if I'm wrong, please. Aotea is more the South Taranaki iwi that are on.
So that's Ngāti Rurunui and Ngāti.
Bonnie, would you like to do this before I culturally embarrass myself, or Emily?
Look, I can't. The mask is getting in the way. Okay.
It's Aotea.
So okay, yeah, that's the southern 3, yeah.
And Taranaki Tokomaru.
Tokomaru is the waka. Ngāti Tama, Ngāti
Mutunga Te Atiawa, Ngāti Maru.
Okay, and that leaves two more. Okay.
And that evolved, I think it's fair to say, that evolved from the situation that when the legislation for some of the treaty settlements was evolving, they felt
I
that.
was just curious because I was interested in how the three constituted geographically in terms of the
Right.
adjacent. Yeah.
But of course, a lot of Taranaki Māori cross over the Waka and also Ngā iwi as well. So yes, it's not a sort of simplistic situation like that.
Yeah. What's the name of the third? It's Tokomaru.
Tokomaru Kura Haupo.
Kura
Haupo. In Aotea.
Alright, yeah. Yes, thank you. Now, I was asking questions. So there were 14 submissions to the initial proposal. You've told us what 10 of them discussed. What did the other 4 discuss? Might be a typo, but
Let me just grab the paper up.
Yeah.
Starting up diligence.
Excuse us while we dig out this
we'll figure out if
information.
it's a typo or not.
There were, yes, because there were a number that were out of scope.
There were a number of them.
7 opposed, 2 supported, 5 were out of scope.
7 opposed.
2 supported, 5 were out of scope.
And 1 for rural, plus the 1 for rural rep, and then it would add up to 14.
14 submissions to this.
7, 2. Oh, and 5. No, sorry, my arithmetic. Good, cool, thank you. And I'm curious about this one. In terms of mana whenua, well, in terms actually of representatives on the committees, have they got voting rights?
Yes.
Everybody, including fed farmers and cool. Okay. So shall we go on to the substantive stuff? In the final proposal now, the effect of the final proposal was to replace, I think it was one of the Southern Taranaki representatives with a Māori ward. So replace one of those members and introduce tell us a bit about how that ended up being the change that accommodated both the policy decision that you've made to.
Could I call on Dale perhaps? Because it was largely around the numbers, wasn't it, with regards to populations and that?
When we looked at the limit of 11, we worked out it was going to be 10 and 1, and then it was a matter of.
Sorry, slow down. When you worked out.
When we looked at one of the options, which was 11,
Yeah.
Under the formula, under the LEA, it came to 10 and 1. So with the 10 general, we then looked at how we're going to represent how those 10 general are going to be representative based on the existing TA boundary, territorial authority boundaries, if you like. So then we wanted to retain as much as close as possible the existing constituencies, but with the 10 general members. And then we had to apply the plus or minus 10% to the constituencies, bearing in mind that we wanted to retain the regional communities of interest through the territorial authority boundaries.
So 2 questions then. One is what was the discussion about effective representation for both Southern Taranaki constituency and the Māori constituency? What discussion was had about that?
So on the South Taranaki constituency, both in submissions as well as around the council table, rural representation or geographical representation was important. And so there was debate around the reduction of 3 to 2 on what is our largest constituency, being the South Taranaki area. So probably what I'm trying to say here is that it wasn't ignored, it was discussed itself. But we're also trying to keep some form of, I don't know whether the word is simplicity, around what each of the constituency were as well. We tried to keep hard to the TLA boundaries for people's clear understanding. We talked about the moving of those to try and accommodate more in South, we tried to adjust boundaries to make it fit. But I think the general consensus, it did actually complicate it for the public, what we were endeavouring to do to try and achieve that in some ways. And we felt as a council that the TLA boundaries was still an appropriate way of which we should actually provide the representation. With regards to Māori representation, so there was a debate with regards to 2 Māori versus 1 Māori. And it led to, we understood that 1 Māori meant that 11 councillors, 2 Māori took it to a minimum of 13 councillors. So that's where it led into other weightings that we had, such as the workload for councillors and all that. I can tell you firsthand that as the chair for a number of terms, one of the most difficult tasks I have is allocating workload to my fellow councillors. Who are wanting to be engaged and wanting to be involved. So I would tell you that there was a weighting put on workload. It wasn't the only weighting, but it was definitely one of them. And 11 has proven to be challenging in itself. So 13 was going to be even more challenging to provide that engagement for them is probably a fair statement, I would say, as chair with regards to that process. Māori representation, types of discussions that we had, if we had 2, how would they represent 8 iwi and the satisfaction of that? Like I said in my opening, none of this is perfect. There's always compromises in it, but are we making strides in the right direction for representation? With regards to would one Māori representative satisfactorily represent te ao Māori points of view? That was discussed. If there were 2, would that add considerable value, and considering that we're also going from 11 to 13, well, a minimum 11 up to a minimum of 13 with regards to that. So they were all debated, all these things. I'm not giving you answers. I'm just saying what was actually the processes of the discussion. They were discussed, those matters, and they were taken into account in the final vote for the council with regards to it.
When you say you have difficulty allocating workload for councillors, is this a negative problem or a positive problem? I mean, what exactly do you mean?
What I mean is that councillors, should I say, candidates put their names forward for council to want to be sufficiently engaged in the process to make a difference. I think that's why people bring themselves forward. And when you have a councillor being brought to the table, we have yay many, what you might call we have yay many committees, we have yay many different roles that we need to be allocated to the councillors to fulfil each year. There's even situations where I, as chair, at some other regions, you'd have the chair actually chair some subcommittees. In our council, I've chosen to have other councillors chair those committees rather than myself, and I be ex officio of that. That is a lot to do with spreading the workload, providing opportunity and all of that. I believe that if you don't provide opportunity for councillors, they have at risk of becoming disengaged with the process. So workload is that we have a finite number of roles to fill for chairmanships, deputy chairs, other regional entities, representation roles and all of that. And it is a challenge to satisfy councillors on a triennial basis with regards to that limited number type thing. 13 would make that obviously more challenging than what it is currently.
What you mean, you have too many councillors for committees?
Basically, there's a lot of councillors for a limited number of roles. Mm.
Can we have a list of the current council and the committees and roles that they have? So, okay, so as an issue was workload and not having to and having a suitable number of councillors for the workload. Yes. Can we go back to the criteria? I mean, well, I don't know. I could see the CEO think so.
No.
So am I right or wrong? You looked.
Yeah, no, look, I'm agreeing with you. It's
Oh,
an issue that
God,
was
I took it the
discussed.
other way. I thought I'd
No,
offended
no,
you.
No, I was just simply agreeing with you. Gee, it was critical
One way,
issue in the
wouldn't it? Yeah.
discussion.
Okay. Now, going back to the Māori constituency, and the legislative arrangements are as this the electors of that constituency are going to be enrolled on the Māori roll, aren't necessarily have mana whenua in the rohi. And you said, look, we've got a fantastic co-governance arrangements in terms of iwi membership, full membership of our important committees and other committees that are required legislatively or because it's a sensible thing to do.
I want to be clear that
Yep.
I wouldn't call it fantastic co-governance. I would suggest it's a step in the right direction in context.
Practice, shall we
Yes.
call it then? Sorry.
It's,
And you
it's by
didn't
no
say
means perfect.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's by no means perfect. Even, you know, in my submission to you, I would suggest that the Electoral Act's not perfect in what it's trying to develop with fair representation as well. And I made that known publicly at the hearing itself, is that, you know, we have to compromise with what it is, but we have to do the best of what we've got.
So you get there, I just, because there is a, it's not subtle the difference, but it can be misunderstood.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I've had it. Do you want to have it?
I do. Good, I do. I guess just a few key things for me. So did you identify communities of interest in this process for Māori and also for the other constituencies? So that's one question.
And so the community of interest, so for Māori, you know, there was discussion, great debate, how can one Māori represent 8 iwi interests type thing? That's just one of the ironies of this whole thing. And indeed, how would 2 represent 8 iwi type thing? And the electoral process is such that even those 2 Māori may not even be Taranaki Uri. That's the situation that we have. And we, you know, when we discussed and debated that having 2 Māori and potentially having a North and a South Taranaki constituencies for those Māori wards itself, that's not perfect either, because we've got South Taranaki Māori who live in North Taranaki. You know, there's this dynamic. But I think what was important is that we were trying to make sure that we had Te Ao Māori represented at the governance table of the council. So you can try and get it perfect with regards to trying to have iwi representative at the table. It was never ever going to work out. It was always going to be compromised in some way. So the community.
So you did look at those
Absolutely.
Māori communities of interest.
Yep.
So that's great for me to know that. I can tick that box.
So we
Yep.
canvassed lots of areas, believe me, and the submitters. Hats off to all the submitters. There were more than just who are in this room here. Did bring all sorts of different angles that we took into consideration when we debated types of. With regards to the general community of interest, we have done that every single time. Stratford District Council, I don't recall, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they've ever been within the bounds of the population, but there is a clear community of interest of Stratford District. That's why they exist in themselves. They're lucky to exist right back into 87 at the local government reform, is the fact that there was strong lobby from Stratford that they wanted to be their own and have the autonomy and have that community of interest with what they were. So we always consider the general population with community of interest as well as other matters.
And what about the North?
I haven't finished.
The chair was about to ask the following question.
Yes, too.
Sorry.
That's all right. So thank you, that answered that for me. That was really good. As far as your boundaries are concerned, I'm aware that New Plymouth and South Taranaki, is it North Taranaki, they are looking at changing those boundaries. Have you talked to them? Are you aware of that? Is that going to impact on what you're presenting today for us?
So we commenced our process approximately a month to 6 weeks ahead of the Plymouth District Council.
Okay.
So I think it's fair to say that the Plymouth District Council has engaged, has thrown a very wide net over its representation of you, and they're exploring many different the rest of it. So at the process that we were at when we established our boundaries for our constituencies, we were unaware where that was going to land. We were aware that they were doing quite a wide view, but we were unaware it was going to land. We are aware that they have their current proposals have different boundaries for their city ward versus their rural wards. We're aware that if that becomes their final proposal, that there will be a misalignment. That has two comments I'd make about that. First, there's historical precedence around that. In previous representation reviews, we've had different boundaries between the two councils, particularly as New Plymouth is our fastest growing urban population and it's spreading with. So, for instance, up to about 3 to 6 years ago, decisions that was part of the city. The second observation I would make is that it actually does no favours for us in terms of our compliance with plus or minus 10% rule. So the current boundaries comply. My understanding of what the new boundaries would do would take us outside of that, but not the end of the world.
Thank you. So, no, that's good.
You haven't got another question?
Oh, of course I have. Early days.
Just aware of time, so we might
Yeah.
rattle them through, but we can catch up at the end anyway if you're right, if you'd like.
Well, yeah, but some of it might be, I'm just, sorry, I was done. We've done that.
Do you want me to give you a minute?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, so just as far as your rural representation and with your decision that has impacted, as you rightly said, on one rural representative. So is that going to impact, considering you are a regional council, is that going to impact, do you think, on your work program and the effective, efficient representation of the rural community?
I'd answer that by saying we have a situation with, like I said, the two main committees, consensus regulatory and policy and planning in particular, where we have external membership of that. And one of them is a Fed Farmers representative, and we also have our TLAs represented. The three of them are around the table. What I'm trying to get to here is that a lot of the policy forming work in that, this council has decisions of the membership of that particular committee to actually do it. And if we felt that we potentially needed representation from a particular sector or whatever, I would suggest that we as a council would make moves to amend that. So it's not a perfect answer to your question about the representation and election process. I think at the end of the day, submissions clearly came through that they felt that the reduction of 3 to 2 of the South Taranaki constituency was weakening the representation from the rural area in context to the metro area. So it's always measured upon that, is that there's so many people from this small geographical area but large population of New Plymouth versus the large geographical area, less population of the rural part of Taranaki.
I think it's also relevant, of course, councillors are elected and take a declaration saying that they're here to represent the region as a whole, even though they may be elected from different constituencies. And certainly there's some pretty strong representation from the rural community around the council table, and they'll continue to be.
And as any governance table is, it's only as good as the skills, experience, attributes that are actually presented by the individuals themselves. I think that we as a region have been fortunate for the rural representation that we've had around the table today.
So what number would you have today around your table that you would consider have a rural background?
Measured that from being everybody outside of the New Plymouth councils. New Plymouth has 5, so that's the remaining 6.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful to know. So,
Yeah, what's the urban versus rural land ratio?
Land.
Ish.
well, she asked.
Oh,
Good question.
see, if you ask me of Wellington, I'd say 60, you're not going to believe the answer. 60% of Wellington is rural. But that's not, we never see, when we're visiting, we never see it. But it must be something like,
I hazard a guess it will be in excess of 90 to 95.
yeah, it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah.
If it's
We-
possible.
We have a large portion of our region, particularly that southern area. Lisa, can you bring up that graphic with that map up of the constituencies from Steve's presentation? Basically, you've got one area, we've got a couple of trends happening in that one there, that's perfect. If you could bring that up there. Thank you. So what you're seeing, bring it up. What you can see there is South Taranaki constituency covering a very large area.
Yeah. We have got the map in front of us.
Go to the slide. South Taranaki constituency covers a large area, but has only got one.
You lose them, stay there, I'll go backwards here. Oh, sorry.
Terrible.
It's got one significant urban area and a number of, quite a large number of smaller urban areas. Stratford is really, this town is the major urban area, but it's small by any standards, and no disrespect to anybody there. But you'll note that area through in the red there in the New Plymouth constituency. Basically, we'll go through to what that is your growth area of that population. That is our fastest growing concentration.
Growing at both ends, I'm aware of the south, but
it's spreading out as
so
in all
it's
directions.
yeah, away.
It's actually coming towards the line quite significantly through some of those.
Okay. So I mean, looking out, but we're only worrying about now. So just some quick questions, and
because we are kind of starting to run a bit behind.
and if there's any more that you really need to go and have a think about, then maybe we could do that, because you know some of the submitters are here, expecting. Another issue that you discussed was the issue of remuneration, and that having 11 versus 13 had implications for salary or payments.
Yeah, so clearly the remuneration pool is divided amongst the councillors, excluding the chairperson in the regional council. And the more councillors you have, obviously the smaller the quantum is for each councillor. I think in the scheme of things, it was something that was debated, but it wasn't much of a weighting put on it. And I think the debate sort of occurred as making sure that councillors felt decently remunerated to, number one, attract decent councillors, to attract decent quality, but also to make them feel fairly rewarded for the effort that they wish to put in there. So it was discussed, and it was one of the elements that had some weighting, but I wouldn't consider it have been a huge weighting with regards to the decision.
Given the population growth in the major urban area, to wit, New Plymouth, looking out another 3 or 6 years, what are likely to be the implications in terms of number of councillors, in terms of fairness of representation? Might be you want to go away and think about that.
There's a simple answer in terms of what the Act prescribes, of course, and then there is the ability that you have, particularly and we have some ability to put forward that outside of the pure plus or minus 10%. And as you probably know, there's been significant debate, particularly amongst rural and provincial New Zealand, for a very long time about the merits of the change that was made to the Act 12, 14 years ago to move away from recognising communities of interest. I think it was explicitly recorded in the Act to the plus or minus 10% is the golden rule within which you must work. But that's as Chair said, that's the legislative construct within which we have to work. Albeit you have some ability, and we do, and as with Stratford, as we've said, always recommended something different to the pure plus or minus 10%, and no doubt, it's a bit of, we can't prejudge what decision the future council might come to, but they may well put forward more variations if they see that it's causing limitations.
Absolutely.
Well, except what I'm trying to explore here is that, and first of all, I think actually regional councils have a little bit of leeway that territorial authorities don't have. So that the 10% is slightly more forgiving. But what I'm getting at is the 11 versus 13 and the issue of the new Plymouth, the urban population becoming more and more dominant in terms of the fair representation criteria. That is, a rural councillor has less weight technically, I'm not talking about that's what that thing's issue. Maybe I'm thinking about it, you might have some comment, because I know we're talking about now, and I know we're not talking about 3 years' time, but there is a time when that thing is going to have to be grappled, and maybe it's sooner than you think. And maybe we passed it. I can't tell from your papers.
No, we're not there yet. The point you make that we will have to address that issue at some point in time is very valid. The tool under the current model, the current legislation we've got is to play around with the city boundary.
On that pause, I'm going to So we're just going to have a break for 15 minutes. So if we can be back by just round about that 11:15 mark would be wonderful. And we're really, really looking forward to our, hearing our next speakers. So Haere mai, lovely to see you. And we'll look forward to hearing from you soon. So we just go out to another little room, only because it is a semi-judicial process. And so we just do like to keep that kind of while we're part of the hearing. So it's not that we don't enjoy your wonderful company, we would love to mingle with you, but we just think that's probably the best way to deal with it. So thank you very much. We'll see you at 11:15.
Give us a chance to find it. needed in Taranaki.
So Hada mai. Lovely to have you here today. Speaking from the heart.
Well, I thought you'd swap positions.
Yeah.
Is that right? We don't mind who will go first. It's up to you.
Ko papa ka puta ko tāne huta ko pamaro ko tūmatawenga ko hoi e tiki tiki ko tāwhiri māte e tukana te rangi ki runga ko papa ki raro ka puta te ira tangata ki te whai ao ki te ao marama e runga whakairi ki runga titiri whakamaua ki a tīna hui e taiki ko Taranaki te maunga ko mimitangi atua te aua ko tuku mauri te waka ko Ngāti Mutunga, Ngāti Tama, ngā iwi ko te kekeri wai, Ngāti wai, ngā hapu ko au te uri o ngā whānau paika rawa ko Makachi, ko Paul Lawrence to Whenua. Nō reira kia kōrua ngā kaiwhakahaere o tēnā hui, ka mihi aroha kia koutou, kia kōrua, ko taimai kōrua ki te maunga tito hea o Taranaki, kei roti te whare whakaruru hau, o tēnei hui whakahirihira mō mātou, ngā tangata whenua o Taranaki. Nō reira, tēnā kōrua, tēnā kōrua. O tira ki a koutou, ngā kaunihiro o te rohi o Taranaki. Ko ki tuku whakaaro kauri he tino pai a koutou mahi, e pāhana ki te tai au, ko te mea nui ki te mihi ki a koutou, o reira tēnā koutou. Ki oku hoa, oku whanaunga, ko taimai hoki. Ki tēnei hui, ka mihi aroha ki a koutou, mō koutou taimai ki a tautoko tēnei kaupapa i tino hirihira mō te rānei mō ngā tangata Māori, mō te tai ao, mō tātou katoa kei Taranaki. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Please don't be nervous.
You know, we don't stand up for our rights, dignity is lost, and dignity can't be negotiated, as said with Boris Carter. The purpose of the Taranaki Regional Council is to protect the land and water, and they have failed. They are standing for you with disillusion and the what is the real role of the TRC. So I'm here for the favour of 2 seats for Māori. I believe 2 Māori seats are needed to enable our participation, partnership and protection of public tuanaki, Mother Earth. After all, there are 3 major waka of Taranaki, at least 8 iwi, and South Taranaki is hugely different to North Taranaki in viewpoints, kawa, tikanga, and even with that in mind, 2 heads that think holistically about a precious environment and look at it from the whole order, tapawhā model as we move forward in the right direction. How can this current council for the Taranaki region represent effectively our aspirations, our responsibilities, and guardianship with their current representation? Is one Māori seat enough to counteract the devastating, catastrophic effects this council has enabled? No, it is not. Is the purpose of TRC to protect the land and water and ultimately people? Was it protect and nurture the economic interests of the very parties that contradict these values? Historically, it seems to be the latter. Most of our rivers are polluted, undrinkable, and many unsafe to swim in. Over the past few years, I've engaged with and indeed challenged the TRC in order to protect my ancestral rivers, particularly the Mimitangi Atua. It has been a disempowering experience and disheartening. I feel that the council doesn't understand us as Māori, the enormity of what our rivers and our lands mean to us. Having adequate Māori representation, both around the decision-making table and among the staff, will ensure that TRC has people with the cultural competency, the tauranga, and the relationships to ensure that our Māori concerns are heard. In order for you to understand or to outline some ideals of the council, so you appreciate just how demoralising this experience has been. In fact, just over a month ago, I wrote a letter to Steve Ruru pertaining to a section on the Taranaki Regional Council website, Can I Swim Here site, and looked at 2 of my ancestral rivers, the Uranui and Mimitangi Atua. The Uranui River said suitable for swimming, and the Mimitangi Atua was not even mentioned. It's right to Steve asking, how could this be the case when both of these rivers had a rāhui imposed on them by our iwi, Te Rūranga o Ngāti Mutunga. This was due to the extremely high levels of E. coli in the Urunui River by the leaching of septic tanks of the homeowners, and the Mimitangi Atua had extremely poisonous toxins leaching into it from a so-called vermicast worm farm owned by Remediation New Zealand Limited that has had thousands of tonnes of toxic waste dumped onto a natural wetland up in the Uriti Valley. This is leaching into the Heianga stream flowing in the Mimitangi Atua. If there was Māori representation, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. This place is contaminating the air. There are currently health experts testing people in the vicinity for health problems correlating to toxic fumes. How is this operation that hasn't had a consent for over 3 years, failed in a recent consent hearing in March, still be allowed to operate, contaminating the air, land and water, and now people that this body, the TRC, are supposed to be protecting? TRC Chairperson David McLeod stopped me from speaking in the pre-hearing to this hearing, saying I was drifting off the topic. However, I was not given a chance to conclude my statements. I was given background information to my knowledge, interaction of the TRC, which was to prove my point. After all, I definitely have a lot to say for the battle for my river, my awa tipuna, and the enabling of acts of environmental terrorism on it by the Taranaki Regional Council from the outfit Remediation New Zealand Limited. This shows a lack of cultural awareness. After all, the greatest tikanga, being Māori, is manaakitanga. And is clearly unaware of this, and perhaps could do us a cultural awareness strengthening about how to act as a Māori, especially in a role that is supposed to reflect the partnership, protection, and participation principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. However, there's also a serious conflict of interest with him in remediation due to sister Tania being in a relationship with Kerry O'Neill's brother Mark, who also is an owner, shareholder of the business, with 712,586 shares. Taranaki Regional Council's dealing with this continued desecration of waterways has been a manner which shows a lack of respect. Non-consented operations have been allowed to continue with no consent for 3 years. November the 7th, 2020, in Taranaki Daily News, Frederick Clay, who's a consents manager from TRC, said, the ponds which hold compostable organic material, including perished chicken, do not drain in the Mimitangi Atua River. How is toxic oil rig waste containing heavy metals compostable organic material free? At a pre-hearing, I asked TRC scientist Nathan Crook where they were taking samples from the Heianga stream. It was on the long straits of the stream. It is an inaccurate place to record data on these straits because of the combustive nature of the water. The best area of
Sorry to interrupt, and I don't mean to, but you're making some very clear points that you're unhappy with the Regional Council's performance. I guess what Commissioner Sue and I really need to know is why having an additional Māori would in fact help hugely with that issue, because you can go through all the issues and I absolutely respect.
I've got points coming up to that. So
That's
this is
fabulous.
the background. This is the pain of something my family and my hapu and myself have suffered.
Okay.
Now I'm going to go into the ways that how we can remediate the situation.
So fairly soon?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, well, I've got another, I'll just bring another point up, please.
Of course you may.
Okay, so for the hearing in March, around the consents process, I requested for independent commissioners because I felt that TRC appointed commissioners, two long-standing councillors, lacked the cultural expertise and transparency to deal with my concerns. However, I was threatened by the $13,000 fee. So in 2016, 3 people, Waitara Fighting for the Integrity of the Waitara River, asked for independent commissioners too. After spending $270,000 in legal costs against these 3 people of Waitara, Fiona Clark, Andrea Moore, and Robert Taylor, the council announced it will proceed with bankruptcy action to collect more than $25,000 in money owed from fines and court costs. Chairman David McLeod said that council's expenditure of more than 10 times the amount owed was necessary to see the president that excessive unpaid fines will not be tolerated. I asked, how is that necessary when they were trying to do the job that these guys are supposed to do? Instead, they used ratepayer money to pursue 3 individuals that were doing just that, trying to protect the air, land, and water from a continued discharge into the Waitara River of sewage. This highlights lack of manaakitanga, mana, and aroha, kaitiakitanga, by the very organisation that is employed to represent these components towards the taiao, which is the environment. The tauranga Māori is important to the way we in Aotearoa maintain and restore our environment because it draws upon values and practices distinctive to a Māori worldview and offers a proactive philosophy of reciprocation and protection between the environment and Māori. Terms such as whakapapa, manaakitanga, mauri, and kaitiakitanga are all used to affirm our role as environmental custodians, while also providing guidance to the way we manage and interact with our natural resources effectively. These concepts and terms illustrate the importance of the tauranga Māori in determining how Māori operate within nature. The unique body of knowledge plays an important role in safeguarding, ensuring the health of the environment because it solidifies the practice of our tupuna, our ancestors. Western science and Māori cosmology suggest two different ways of thinking about the world. The Enlightenment mindset of European values sees human as separate and dominant over nature, whereas us Māori share a belief in an inseparable relationship that exists between people and nature. As Kennedy Warren, New Zealand Geographic says, where European ontology, the nature of being, is linear and hierarchical, Māori ontology is circular and reciprocal. European thinking leads to separation and objectification. Māori thinking leads to a relational exchange. The best way to understand how nature, people, and the cosmos are connected is through whakapapa. Whakapapa extends beyond human relationships. As Charles Rowe explains, the natural world from a Māori perspective forms a cosmic family. The weather, birds, fish, and trees are related to each other and to the people of the land. This is the lineage that reflects the creative narratives of Sky Father and Earth Mother, Papatūānuku, from their separation. The world of light emerged, the elements, the atmosphere, the water, the forest, the birds, the people were brought to life and all descendants of the divine, all created out of the same dust. This is how these narratives relate people to mountain, rivers, trees, and even birds as part of larger extended family. Within the 2014 Te Ura Wera legislation, the Māori concept of mauri and mana are mentioned. The important point here is the connectedness of all things. The land or a body of water has no mauri, life force, it cannot have mana, power and energy. If the water is sick, it's a direct reflection of the people, inextricably linked through whakapapa. As Waikato Senior Law Lecturer Linda Te Aho explains, we see ourselves not only of the land, but as the land. Pressing issues of water quality and climate exchange are affecting us all. Imagine if the Māori worldview was also widely accepted. What if we all saw that coastline, that river, that mountain as part of ourselves? Would we then throw rubbish on it? Would we then pollute it? Would we be more caring and nurturing to those very elements? Finding these small interactions, the places where Western science collide with Māori truths, is the key to people and nature prospering. Everything has Māori, a vitality where it supports life. We will have the power to enhance the Māori of our waterways, and we will have the power to diminish it. The way to enhance Māori is to clean up the pollution and work on that together. So I say 2 seats are needed so we get this Māori perspective in to make sure this happens within this council. Traditionally, there was an intimate relationship between people and the environment. The health of a community was reflected in its environment and vice versa. For example, if waterways are unclear or polluted, something was amiss with the local people. Kaitiaki was based on this relationship. Customary practices maintain the balance between communities and nature. For activities such as hunting birds, gardening and fishing, this ensures that resources are managed sustainably. Practices include setting temporary rahui on certain areas. There are currently 2 rahui on our ancestral rivers, Ururui and Mimitangiatua. I pose a question, how well has the TRC managed consents, the process and monitoring around them? Poorly, I say. Our legal system has recognised the personhood of Te Ura National Park and Te Awa Tupuna, Whangarei River. Research and science has increasingly taken on as Te Reti o Waitangi obligations to partner, participate and protect Māori interests. And all over Aotearoa, the rapid growth of Te Reo Māori education is increasing people's understanding of the Māori way of seeing the world. As I stated at the beginning of my kōrero, I believe 2 seats are needed to enable participation, partnership and protection of Papatūānuku, Mother Earth. Although I'm here for us Māori, what I'm also here for us all, everyone in Taranaki. After all, research shows what is good for Māori is good for all, because we have a holistic viewpoint on everything based on our tapu whā model. Nō reira, ko ai te tai ao, ko te tai ao, ko ai. I am the environment, environment is me. Toi tū te whenua, toi tū ngā awa, toi tū te tai ao. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko tō mātou waka, ko te rangi Māori e, te hae ana te puno te aroha, ai ui ana rā, i haere mai ai, ko te ara whanunga, kei mamaurawa e. Kia ora.
Why two?
Because
Rather than three? Or?
Two's needed because North Taranaki, the tikanga and kaua from North Taranaki to South Taranaki is quite different. It's a big area to monitor. You know, the climate, the nature in North Taranaki is a lot different than South Taranaki. So North Taranaki, we have tropical forest systems, we have tidal rivers. South Taranaki have a few tidal rivers, but they have a lot of rivers coming off the mountain as well. So the environment is totally different. So to understand the true knowledge around the environment, you need to be a person that's walked those lands and have grown up around them. And also to understand the history, the ancestral lore around these things is really important. Also feel that it's a big ask asking people to represent North, I say Tuku Māori Waka, which is North Taranaki canoe, to represent the Aotea Waka, the South Taranaki canoe, and the Kurahopo and other canoes. So I believe that two representation will give us two heads are better than one. And we'll get a stronger participation towards the holisticness of the environment, how we should be kaitiakitanga around it, how we should protect it, how we look at ourselves as people. Because if we look after the environment, she sustains us, she looks after us. It is our pātaka kai, our place where we get food, and it's a place where we cleanse ourselves.
So if you feel it's really important to have two to represent North and South, we would have to then put a line somewhere on the map, because otherwise both could come from the South or both could come from the North. And I know this is a really hard question, but where would you put that line?
I'll say New Plymouth, being the middle. To me, that seems like the middle, you know, so those Waitara North can represent the North. South of New Plymouth can represent the South, but also they can also come together and bring their cultural perspectives, their knowledge around the environment together to share collective thought around the processes.
And I know it's very mean of me to ask.
I can't speak for others.
No.
I can't. I'm only here for speaking for my family and myself.
Absolutely, but you would be comfortable if that line had to be drawn there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Sue?
Presumably that line would sever a rohe or more than one. Maybe. So if, what I'm saying, if we use the New Plymouth District Council's boundaries, well, if we use the boundaries of the current Northern Ward, which is more than, and the New Plymouth boundaries, there would be a dissection of at least one, of at least one rohe. Any thoughts about how that could be handled?
To me, like, I wouldn't see it as dissection. I'll see it as a collective voice. They can work collaboratively together, collegially together, to make sure that all the perspectives are heard. The South Taranaki canoes are heard and the North Taranaki is heard. So they work together as a driving toki, a wedge, to be able to create positive outcomes for us, tangata whenua, and for the taio, for the environment.
I wonder if in the right reply, if you could just
For us, and we welcome your input. Okay.
And if there's that one and any that you think would be appropriate if there were 2 wards.
Can I comment now?
No.
Okay.
But in your right of reply would be wonderful. Thank you.
That was very helpful.
You're good.
Yeah, no, I was very
Well, it wasn't so bad, was it? No.
I don't mean to attack people personally, but I sort of feel like I have to make sure that we're heard, because the pain for my family is incomprehensible. Like when we get together, we talk about our river, we cry, my uncles and mum and myself and family. And it's so hard when we come up against a big organisation like this to have our justice, for what we believe in. So
We strongly feel you, Aroha.
kia ora, thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Appreciate
And we may be a little restrained by our particular
Man,
but
I appreciate you listening all the same.
I endorse, I think, what the chair said.
Emily. It's your moment in the sun. Could you speak a wee bit louder? We can just hear the air conditioning. Or maybe put that microphone just a wee bit more. Thank you. Kia ora.
So ki te tātuku pāpā ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Taranaki, ko Ngāti Mutunga, ko Te Atiawa na iwi, ko Pariaka te papakainga. I am one of the 6 iwi reps on the committees here at the council. So this is my 4th time talking about this, as you'll know. So I'll try not to repeat things that have been put in writing that you will have read already. I just wanted to acknowledge firstly that there are people in the room here that wrote objections to the proposal that the council put forward. So if you feel the need to ask some questions, they're here.
Unfortunately, we're not able to do that, but thank you for that information. That's really helpful. And we can actually have a look at anything that we can ask for any information, and I know that we've been provided with that as well. So we've seen all the submissions, et cetera, throughout the process.
I also wanted to acknowledge Paura, because with my work in the last 4 years as a community rep for our iwi, this is the stories I hear from all of our people around the maunga. They're dissatisfied and frustrated with Taranaki Regional Council, and they want to be more involved. And just in the last 2 years, we've seen our iwi have picked up by having, I think we have about 50 paid kaitiaki now amongst all the iwi who are working on environmental restoration and actively trying to participate in governance of taia. But I wanted to concentrate on the main issue of this argument, which is the right to apply for an acceptance to section 19B part 2 of the plus or minus 10% rule. And so the main point on that, of course, is whether if it is considered that this is required to achieve effective representation of communities of interest. So communities of interest, it is very clear that Māori are a very strong community of interest. Under Te Tiriti of Waitangi, 15 years later, we had our tino rangatira taken away from us through the English Acts Act. And we have been fighting for 180 years to have an equal voice in the protection of our people and our environment. That's very clear. Under our tikanga kawa, kaitiakitanga is very important to us, and we have a very broad perspective of how that works ecologically, and we have a very long-term view of always thinking of our mokopuna coming ahead. And as we all know, we have poor statistics for Māori in poverty, housing, employment, imprisonment. So what's good for us is good for the entire country and our region, as Paura said. But so more specifically, to talk about the rural-urban divide in Taranaki, when you look at the numbers, it's roughly 5 or 6 to 5 or 6. But if you look more closely at the north to south divide, you can see there's a clear divide. With the current position, we have 7 in the north versus 4 in the south for councillors. The proposal that's been put forward by council would effectively turn that to 8 in the north and 3 in the south, because most of our people, most of Māori live in New Plymouth, and so it's more likely that we will get somebody from New Plymouth, Waitara, as our spokesperson. So 8 to 3 is a huge divide when you consider that the southern areas, South Taranaki District Council and Stratford District Council, comprise 2/3 of the whenua. And so for Māori, we think territorially when we think of our kaitakitanga. So we don't think about how many people live somewhere, we talk about the area that we're responsible for as kaitaki. So this goes against our whole worldview, effectively. When the council staff helpfully put together the effects that would have, so if we went with the 2 Māori wards and 11 councillors, when they looked at the effect that would have on the constituencies, the 4 constituencies, the effects were not hugely outside the plus or 10 minus rule. So for New Plymouth, it was plus 11.82. North Taranaki, it was plus 7.52, which is within that. Stratford was negative 10.18, which is pretty close. It was really just South Taranaki, which was plus 18, which is not a huge falling out of that. Where am I? So, yeah, I guess something I'd like to touch on is that, like Paolo said, having one spokesperson for all of our 8 iwi, some argue there's 11 to 12 iwi, is a huge job. If we count up, there is about 46 marae in Taranaki, and there's around 62 hapu. That's a huge responsibility on one person. And looking at how effective it would be to campaign and to communicate with those people, the region is massive. To get around the whole region driving non-stop would take 6 hours. So talking about fairness and effectiveness for campaigning for people running for those positions, it hugely disadvantages them compared to, say, the 5 councillors running for New Plymouth, where they can, it's in the city. And as we know, Māori are already overrepresented in low incomes and difficulties with communication and confidence. I mean, even with this whole process, there's been quite low participation by iwi and hapu. And I think really because we're so used to losing and we have so many fights to battle that we pick the battles that we think are easier to win. So I just think a lot of people thought this wasn't winnable, and we're a bit too stubborn, and we think we have a special circumstance for our community to be allowed an extra seat. Yeah, I think, that's really my main point, is that to achieve effective representation of our community of interest, we need another seat, and I don't think it would have a great impact on the rest of the councillors and the greater community. If anything, it would improve things. We would share that workload. Or maybe just my last point. So as a iwi rep on the committees, it might seem like we have more of a voice, but we can come to one meeting every 6 weeks. And, at the moment we're not having a meeting for 2 months because of the Christmas period. So it's very little participation. Because you're only in one committee, you only kind of get a snapshot. And to be honest, most of the decisions that are made in those committees are already made, and we're always outnumbered. So it's kind of tokenism. But if we had someone who could actually have a broader view, could read all the papers for all the committees, could participate more in the community, could build on those relationships with our people, with the iwi reps, then that would only make things stronger for us and for everyone. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Can I ask you the same question? Do you think if there were to be 2 Māori representatives, does it matter if they all come from one, if they both come from one area, or do we need to, in fact, do a line somewhere?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we do.
Okay.
Because most of our people live in the north, in New Plymouth, and so it's more likely that we end up with people from there. So we have a shift, that would take us to it would be 9 versus 2, north to south divide. And I think it would be easy to divide because I think we're kind of used to it with our 3 waka. We have 1 waka in the north with 4 iwi, 1 waka in the north with 3 iwi, and then Taranaki iwi kind of sits in the middle. So I would let them decide.
But there is a risk that waka may be.
But they could
split
easily sit in the south, I think, but still be participating in the north.
Okay.
I think Taranaki iwi is used to participating across the board. So that boundary, I guess, would be sort of south of New Plymouth and north of Stratford. And to be honest, I think actually the community divides itself because we have 2 main cities and hospitals in Taranaki. There's New Plymouth and Hawara. And everyone like myself who lives kind of in between, we pick the city that's closest. So for me, it's like 25 minutes to New Plymouth, or it's like an hour to Hawara. So the place I participate in most is the north. But yeah, 10 minutes down the road, everyone heads to the south. So there is a natural boundary already.
Within the workshopping, do you think there was a good discussion about the different alternatives? And did you feel that you could feed in well to that discussion and decision making? Oh, no, you can't make decisions, but you can be involved in the discussions.
I think there was eventually, but I think the crucial first one, that there wasn't enough for us iwi reps. I don't feel like there was enough lead in for us to understand the importance of the decision that was being made that day. And it was the end of a long day, and I think people were tired, and that made.
So sorry, just to confirm, was that a workshop?
That was a workshop where all the iwi reps were allowed to discuss to put forward the first proposal, which is the proposal that's been stuck with.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just think maybe if there was more lead into that workshop, we might have had a different outcome. I mean, I've been happy with the debates that have been had afterwards, and it was nice to see the alternative be put on for the final vote, and 4 councillors voted for that. So things are shifting. But, yeah.
You feel that council was just staying with status quo?
Most of them, yep.
Okay.
Yep, I think they're comfortable.
Thank you.
Why do you think that?
It's quite clear that there's a racial divide. Most of our councillors are Pākehā, most of them are men. And that's just how it's been in Taranaki for generations in governance. Yep.
You talk about post-colonial, but had there been discussions among iwi, each individual one, I guess, but certainly, was there a review as the workshop started about what would be an appropriate?
There was no consultation with iwi, I have to. So that, for me, it was a bit of a surprise to turn up to the workshop and realise how important it was, and that there hadn't been the lead in for us to consult our people even.
I wasn't expecting that answer, I must say. What do you think of the strengths and weaknesses of the Māori constituencies, or the Māori wards, I think the term we're using, in terms of the governance of the region and relationships with iwi? Sorry, I'm not looking for a thesis or anything like that.
So do you mean what would be the strength of having?
Yeah, I mean, from
more
your
Māori?
point of view as a leader in your community.
I didn't quite understand the question,
Yeah.
so that's fine.
Sorry.
I need clarification.
Yeah,
I mean, I think Paura laid it out pretty clearly, and like other people like him who are kaitaki, who've been put in place by their elders to look after areas, that they know their region, and they know it not just in the water, they know how it affects the fish and the plants and the people, and that they bring a wealth of knowledge.
that's useful. No, thank you, both of you. It's very useful.
Wonderful, lovely to meet you both. And thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you.
So guys, I want to give you enough time. If there's anything else you want to prepare, it's your call. 15 minutes or so. I can give you longer if that would.
How about we, 15 will be fine. I
15 will
think.
be great.
We'll come back.
Okay, so we will be back here again around about 22.
Can we make
How's
it
that sound?
20? Just we need to make some calls to Wellington about our travel arrangements because that's we're a bit.
They said that. I was just being extra.
I know you were being, yeah, I know you were being kind to you, but
Okay, 20 to 12. Thank you. Look forward to it.
I just want to be useful.
Pardon? They have. Oh, I'm quite, oh, no,
there's a couple here.
no, but not submitted.
These all this
The
isn't working.
appellants.
Something's frozen.
No, anyway, well, maybe we didn't make it plain enough, as you said. So we did the issues and notice.
Bad audio professional thing. There, that might be the problem, is it? No. And go through the process side was the key one I wanted. Review process. Yes, thanks.
When you are, guys.
Okay, look, a couple of 2 or 3 key points. I'll give you some introductory comments and then Chair David will
Lovely, thank you.
we'll pick up again. Again, I think it's helpful just to remind you of the process that we've been through here in terms of putting things into some context. Of course, the legislation was changed at the beginning of this year to change the rules around creation of Maori constituencies. So Council considered a report at the 23rd of February meeting, which would have been its first meeting for the year. Do you want to consider proceeding with the establishment of a Maori constituency given the change in legislation? They made a decision that it was important to consult and indeed, as part of that process, also look at consulting with the formal iwi authorities, of which there are 8 for different iwi authorities. As I commented on, there were 380 odd submissions received, at least 4 of those of which came from the formal iwi authorities and the Taranaki Māori Trust Board. So they contributed at that stage, and indeed, as I recall, it was at least 3 of the chief executives turned up to the hearing and spoke to the council about their views on creation of a Maori constituency. So they made a considered decision to be involved in the consultation process at that point in time, along with, of course, as well as the formal authority representatives, a number of individual Maori chose to participate as individuals in the consultation process, as indeed the 2 submitters that you've heard today are there presenting their submissions as individuals in that process.
Can I just ask a question at that point? And feel free, so if you know, as the subjects come up, we can ask some questions. So when you did that consultation, and good on you for doing that, that's fantastic. Did you talk about the upcoming representation review as well, and use that as an opportunity to talk about the various options that would be before you?
Not in that first process was purely about the legislation has changed. Should we proceed to establish a Maori constituency? And obviously we weren't due, as I understand it, we did a representation review 3 years ago. So we still weren't necessarily due to do one until the next electoral cycle, given the normal 6-year term for doing them.
My recollection
But with the
is,
legislative change, you did have to do it earlier, didn't you?
So council had made an early decision in August of last year to not have a Maori constituency. And the law was changed this year.
The second point to note is that the 14 submissions.
Oh, sorry, no, I did have a question on that. You said that 3 iwi came to the submission process. How many iwi submitted?
In the formal process.
In the 23rd, on the process that followed your decision on
In August.
Informal consultation.
In the informal consultation, there was 3 of the iwi authorities and the Taranaki Māori Trust Board lodged submissions that I can see from a quick look. All right, as well as a number of individual Māori residents, mana whenua, who depending on and variety in there. One of those iwi authorities, Ngāti Ruanui, chose to lodge a formal submission to the initial proposal, and indeed appeared before council when it was making its decision on that initial proposal The chief executive also appeared in front of them and presented the submission, again along with a number of other individuals. So the mandated, albeit treaty settlement mandated, if you get into the iwi versus hapu discussion, many would argue that's a Crown construct, not a hapu, not a Maori construct. Be that as it's may, the formal legal entities that the Crown has deemed are there to represent their iwi, formally presented in terms of through that process as provided for whatever reason, and I'm not prejudging that at all, the others decided they didn't need to participate in the formal consultation process. That's obviously the nature of the process in which we participate.
So the formal consultation, see, the reason I'm getting confused is was the consultation process about the policy decision, if we call the paper 21.
Yes.
And that preceded the decision, presumably, the formal consultation. Is that when the three iwi engaged? Or did they engage after when did they first engage? That might be
back following the 23rd of February decision during March this year.
Okay, cool.
The three iwi authorities and the Taranaki Māori Trust Board lodged formal consultations in their name as the formal authorities.
That's fine.
But
I've written down informal. So
But to be clear, this was for the creation of a
The
Māori
policy
constituency.
decision.
This is not
I use that term
representation.
deliberately.
Yes.
For the policy
Understand
decision.
that, but I think you'll understand where we're going at a later question.
But at that consultation, my recollection is it was discussed that if a Māori a constituency was created, there would be a representational review,
Absolutely.
but we did not actually go into discussion of what options there may be with regards to
They had to make the decision.
Yes.
Yep. We understand that.
Yep.
Mhm.
So that was the decision was made to create it on the 6th of April. We then had the workshops that were referred to. There was two workshops involving the iwi representatives. First one was on the 18th of May, which was very much a preliminary scene setting and did talk about options of 11, 12 and 13 councillors during that workshop on the 18th of May. And as I commented this morning, certainly some of our iwi representatives on the committees made very useful commentary and points of view during that process.
Steve, sorry to stop you again. So I guess my first question was kind of leading up to this one. So you had no consultation with iwi in advance of the workshops about the representation reviews and the options that potentially would be there for them?
Not once we'd made that decision to go through it, because again, one of the issues in here is we had a very compressed time frame to get through. Given the decision to proceed with a Māori constituency wasn't made until the 6th of April, we had a compressed time frame to get through and do all the workshop, the different options, bring councillors and iwi reps up to speed with what the range of options were, get a proposal released, get hearings, etc., get through this process.
Emily mentioned that she found that really hard because she came to the workshop and started to understand the different options and the ramifications, but there was very little time and she wasn't sure that and I'm wondering, was that her role to go back to iwi and explain it to them? Do you know what I'm saying? It's very hard to become part of a process that is as complex as representation reviews are without any workshopping with other than the iwi representatives who are already on your committees, it's quite a big ask for them to then go back and do the education.
I think it would be fair to say we do have on our committee some very capable, very well-informed iwi representatives that understand this process quite well and have participated in it in the past. And that showed up during that workshop where some very informed commentary was provided and useful contributions made to the discussion. Emily is one of 6 representatives, and look, I can't remember exactly how many of those were there, but she was but one of 6. All right. And as I said, there was some very, very substantial and useful commentary made during that process. And certainly, we would be very happy to have provided supporting materials, but as I said, there was some very capable iwi elected reps around that table. Then we had a second workshop on the 8th of June, which expanded on the range of what that, as a result of that first workshop, we were asked to go away and do a range of work relating that expanded on the material covered during the first workshop. And as part of that, for example, was when we also came back with the option of dropping to 9 councils rather than 11, so that we ended up with councils considering 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13, whole range of options and boundaries and constituency boundaries, etc., as part of that process.
So at that workshop, you considered 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13 councillor models?
Yes, models and different boundaries. And
with the different models for any?
Different constituency boundaries as well.
Yes.
North, south, and 2 different variations, just the city and the balance, and then a constituency split.
And so obviously as part of that process, we got into consideration of the issues around if you have if you have 2 Maori constituencies, do you split them north and south, or do you do them region wide? Again, there was quite considerable discussion about that. And indeed, in the final paper, decision-making paper, the options around, because again, the final report to council on September 20 in September talked about if 11, then obviously just be the 1 Maori constituency. If 13, then you could have 2, and it gave an option of splitting Taranaki North and Taranaki South alongside of the 1 region-wide constituency as well. Now that model, and you asked the question about whether having a north and south would split, if you use the TLA boundaries, would you split the rohis? Absolutely, in a number of cases. And if you go back to this map, you would be splitting, and Mike or David, the region better than me, but New Plymouth would include parts of Taranaki, and Ngāti Maori would certainly be split against the geographical boundaries, as would probably Ngāruahine would be partly in Stratford as well, I suspect. So you'd be splitting at least 3 iwi rohi if you had a north and south constituency based on TLA boundaries.
It's actually
4 Ngāti Rōnui would get split as well. So it'd be at least half of them you'd split their rohi.
But so what was debated at the council during deliberations is that drawing a line anywhere in Taranaki was never ever going to be perfect. And even if you start talking about iwi geographical boundaries, it doesn't guarantee getting representation from those iwi at all within those wards that you're actually drawing up. So you could do what was suggested by the submitters of drawing a line of North Taranaki there to some manner. That doesn't mean anything to stop a Ngāti Rōnui person being successful in that ward being elected to the council. So it is imperfect with regards to getting iwi representation, the actual local government act itself, just the whole actual process. So drawing a line anywhere in Taranaki will not guarantee anything that the submitters were actually endeavouring to get. That's part of the imperfection of what we've got.
In your submissions at the beginning of the hearing, you talked about the difference between representing Te Ao and representing iwi, and that the role and in terms of the legislative imperatives of this establishment, which is a step towards a step. So in that sense, and your experience working in this area, how important is it, do you think, given the difference of the co-governance role that you're seeking, you're moving towards in terms of your working with iwi, and then the current role of Māori wards is described in the Act? And I know it doesn't, well, no, I'll see if you know, how important is it that the individual rohi are not split? We can't have 8 councillors, can we? Because the law doesn't allow it.
One of the challenges here, though, you come back to that challenge of the Electoral Act is not about electing mana whenua.
No, that's my, sorry.
So anybody of any heritage could stand in those Māori constituencies and could well be successful.
Yeah, they could be Ngāti Parawa, they could be.
Exactly. Or even Ngāti Raukawa wherever.
Or Ngāti Maniapoto.
So, well, indeed, Ngāti Maniapoto, which one of the issues is that there is a ninth iwi that claim to have, and the Crown has recognised that Maniapoto have interests in Taranaki. Now, the 8 iwi, well, simply one of the 8 iwi on there has probably have a different world view to that, but the Crown, is, in its prerogative, has decided that Ngāti Maniapoto have interests in Taranaki as well. So it's part of the interest of the diverse mixture that we have to work with. And the Local Electoral Act, of course, is not, which is the construct within which we have to work, is not set up to create mana whenua relationships and enable that. And it's not the basis of the, which brings into part of the point we made as well earlier on, that the current legislative framework is not perfect. It has its limitations and outlines clearly some parameters in which we need to work. And we've tried to work within those in terms of, arriving at a fair and reasonable decision on that.
There's lots of opportunities, though. We should also not set. I mean, in general, because we've suddenly got
yes.
I'm
Well,
just saying it's a good thing,
Yep. And look, the council has certainly tried to take advantage of some of those opportunities by making the decision to proceed with the formation of a Māori constituency, and explore that as a valid option through the process. Again, we all love democracy, but democracy doesn't always give an answer we like. So it is what it is, and we need to work within that current construct. So look, those are the key sort of opening comments that I'd like to make. But hand over to Chair David to perhaps make a few others.
Yeah. So I think what the point I wish to summarise for the hearing is that we feel the process was strong, considering some of the impediments that we had. Number one, impediments of time frame with the change of legislation early on in the year, and what we needed to get done by a particular date with regards to representation. That was a constraining factor, and although it could be argued that that was not perfect, we did the best I believe that we could, given that. And sometimes, as will not come as a surprise to you, it's not always easy to consult and engage with Māori in a timely fashion, given all the pressures that they have on them as well. So we do have to meet that expectation as well. I really do want to repeat, there was considerable discussion and debate around 1 versus 2 Māori representation, and also on whether to draw a line indeed in the map at all in Taranaki. There was discussion, if there were 2, would it be better to be at large for the whole of Taranaki? Because at the end of the day, with any governance unit, it's as much about getting great skills, attributes, qualities in that. And the homogenous nature, I would call it, and I'm not trying to be rude with regards to that statement, the homogenous nature of Taranaki uri amongst all the iwi, and the homogenous nature of the geographical living of Taranaki uri, such as I described. We have Te Atiawa living in Hawara and Ngāti Rua and vice versa. There is no perfect construct within the current legislation to get absolute representation from particular iwi, as the submitters eloquently submitted what they were wanting type thing. That does not, there's nothing that guarantees that in any construct, okay? So, there was discussion that if you do draw a line, does that limiting? And what are the cons of actually having one big ward with 2 from that there? Does that draw quality people with Te Ao Māori? Not necessarily, because it could be a non-Taranaki Māori that comes through with it. And I personally think that the council has been focused on increasing the voice of Māori at the decision-making table here. And I think the legislation with the settlements actually assisted that with regards to representation on the committees and all that. It was a step. And the council deciding early on this year to introduce the Māori ward was another step in it. It is not the answer. It is not to the satisfaction of Māori. I don't think it's to the satisfaction of the Taranaki Regional Council of actually construct, but it is a step in the direction of getting Māori increasingly involved at decision-making tables type thing. We are lucky with the quality of some of the Māori that we have in the representation roles around the table of the council with the 2 main committees and that. We are fortunate with that. But, like any electoral process, you're a bit at the whim of what gets delivered up from the electors with regards to that. So I'm very, very clear on that. So the council, I say to you, made its best endeavours and try to provide a quality process within the limitations of different things in the timeframe, et cetera, to deliver an outcome. The council had vigorous debate, particularly on the 2 options that have been the primary discussion of today with regards to it. The decision of the council went to vote. It wasn't unanimous. Okay, so there was, but the council made a decision democratically for what it was, and that's what you had before you today with regards to that. I was a little disappointed today. I think Paula took a personal aim at myself. He took an aim at my mana. He took an aim at my integrity. And he did state in the summary of his submission that he felt that was the only way to get attention. I would like to speak to Paora Kanohi ki Kanohi, which I think is a far more appropriate, culturally apt way of having that kind of conversation. This is a public hearing. And he took aim at me personally and took aim at my whānau with regards to it. And I've got to be honest, I find that distasteful that he's done that. I'm the only Māori councillor elected to this council and have been for some time type thing. I believe that I have done what is in my powers, understanding that a chairmanship is not a dictatorship. It is a facilitation role on behalf of a group of governors to come up with the best possible decisions you can. I have driven on a number of occasions a Te Ao Māori point of view with regards to the discussions that we have. The council makes the decision, I don't make the decision. He made accusations of the conflict of interest I have with an entity in North Taranaki that has an effect on the environment. And number one, quite appropriately, I nor any of the councillors had any participation in that consent. And by the way, the consent he talks about was declined. We were actually supportive of his kaupapa, and yet he still took that as us not doing our job. I find it distasteful. He took aim at my integrity in this public hearing. I'm sorry to have to bring that from this case, and I know it's off, but I feel I need to make use of the public nature to be able to defend that as well.
Absolutely. And sorry, as chair, I didn't realise that it was a personal attack. I thought he was actually talking about the regional council as a whole. So I'm really sorry. I might have been reading my questions at that stage. So I do apologise to you for that, because I don't believe that there should be any personal attacks in a public meeting at all. So I would have pulled that up sooner had I known. So I do apologise.
I think, and I also appreciate the fact you've responded, because it's, I ignored it. I mean, I can't remember what he said in the sense that it was irrelevant. But I understand your distress, but it's good that you've,
Well,
good that you've
anyway, it is what it is. I
clarified.
mean, he's passionate about the kaupapa, and he's endeavouring to get an outcome of his own will in that, and I accept that, but it should not be a situation of playing the man rather than the ball with regards to it. So I was disappointed that I'll put that on the table, and I want to say that we're press over there in the corner, and I don't want to let it go by where my integrity is passed in judgment with regard to, by the way, I'm Ngāti Mutinga. I'm actually probably whanaunga with them type thing. And I've got to be honest, I haven't seen Paora at any of our council meetings other than the submission process. So for him to pass judgment on how I act with regards to the way in which I conduct as a chairman and the way in which I lead this council, I find distasteful. I'm sorry. And I'm not taking away from the passion of the submission. Okay? I'm not. But anyway, back to the kaupapa. The kaupapa. Taranaki Regional Council stands by the fact that we believe we ran a strong process. We've clearly got submitters that got an outcome from this council that was not befitting of what they wished for us, and they have every right to have this hearing to submit as they choose. But I hope that today it shows the hearing committee that this council hasn't had a weak process. It could always be better. But we've done everything in our powers to have taken everything into account. I don't believe we've left any, if not any stone unturned with regards to debating it at a councillor level. And we've been very well served by our management and also Dale with making sure we understood the boundaries of which we can come from. My final statement is that the act that we have to abide by with regards to representation review is not perfect by any means, and it does not deliver the outcome that I believe that is perfect for any entity, including the council, including Māori, including iwi, including hapu type thing. But it is what it is, and it's our job to do the best we can under that construct. Thank you.
Probably just my final question, and thank you for an excellent right of reply, which has addressed quite a few of the questions that we had. Workload was discussed from the councillor's point of view, and certainly the appellants brought up the fact that one Māori representative would in fact have a huge workload. But bearing in mind that you do have other iwi representatives in your council committees as well, do you feel that it's a job that would be so totally overwhelming that someone couldn't do a good job?
Well, my view is that there's, as I commented before, there's some very capable and skilled Māori and who whakapapa from Taranaki, from Missouri, who would make an outstanding contribution to that role and do it very well. So, and obviously, as I've commented, observed a number of elected members working in quite different settings, and it becomes about the quality of the individual that happens to get elected is ultimately the key determinant of the quality of their contribution around the council table. It's about the individuals that get elected, and indeed, one of my mayors at one stage shared, Steve, you need to understand that what it takes to convince people to tick a box is quite different to the skills that might contribute to being a good governor and a good councillor.
One more question I have.
Can I answer that answer?
Oh, absolutely.
I think that Taranaki is blessed with some wonderfully skillful and experienced Māori and some young Māori that would contribute wonderfully. That doesn't guarantee that they want to put their mana at stake by going through a very public election process to actually bring those skills to a table. And we've been lucky, and we've got one example at the back of the room there that you are very familiar with is that people are from time to time willing to bring themselves forward, to make themselves available. That's one of our biggest challenges, I believe, is even, doesn't matter what the result of this is still getting the quality to come through, to be through it. And my answer to your question, Madam Chair, is that it will be a challenge that can be mitigated by the quality of the individual that comes through. And I'm clear in my mind, you will struggle to be a representative of the iwi of Taranaki rather than presenting a te ao Māori point of view to the discussion type thing. In fact, an individual or indeed two individuals would struggle to do that. But I know that quality individuals will be engaged and connected to ngā iwi o Taranaki, or 8 of the iwi, to take that into the context of the debate and the conversation that they bring to the table of this council type thing. So it's my answer is determinant on the individual stroke individuals that you actually attract as to whether they can actually do that well or not.
Well said. Just a technical question. If we went with the new Plymouth proposed boundaries, would that be workable? And what are your views on the naming of?
As a council, would it be workable? We will make it work. And as for the Māori, a name for it, it would definitely be one that we would engage with Māori with regards to that. We would not be the determinant. We've actually made that decision as a council, is that we would consult.
The general constituency.
Oh, sorry.
Than the Māori
Or the
constituency.
Māori constituency.
You talked about aligning.
The general.
Yes, the
Oh,
general.
sorry,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sorry, I'm
So, may I suggest that general constituencies, the only difficulty would be the plus or minus 10% rule, and as you previously noted in this hearing, that you take a different view on that rule for regional councils versus territorial authorities. So absolutely, it could work.
So names would stay the same, you would think, should those proposed boundaries?
I would suggest that we have had no consultation on that, no changes and all the rest of it. So I would recommend to you that you leave them alone. If we were to make an arbitrary decision, it would be received just as well as this if you were to make an arbitrary decision.
As if we did.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Perfect answer to my
The only
question.
other comment to note on that, of course, is, and it goes back to the question that Commissioner Piper asked about the future growth of New Plymouth, of course, is the under the current construct, where the New Plymouth ward is only 1.65% above the average, whereas under that construct it would be something like 5 and 5.8 or
5 point something, yeah.
5 point something. So you would limit that potential for growth before you hit a problem with the plus or minus 10%. All right.
I just want to go back to the topic for one final question. We have to have regard to fair representation, but we've got a lot of lack, it's a bit of movement available because it's a regional council. The issue of effective representation isn't just what happens at the council table, it's also electors' access to, or residents' access to the councillor, and the councillor's access to residents. Now, we've talked about a hypothesis that if we had a 2-person Māori ward, there is a possibility, as the submitter said, and they thought it was better than a possibility, that both of them would come from the northern part of the region, just because of the way population fell. And that, on paper, that could mean you'd have a couple of councillors from. If you lived in Waisa, and you had to go down to have a discussion in the south, it's a 4-hour round trip, isn't it?
So
You
now,
said it was 2 hours
Round trip.
top to bottom.
yeah,
From Uranui, which is another 45 minutes on from Waitara.
I'm glad I asked the question. So if you lived in Uranui,
It's not Uranui, sorry.
I look sorry, I'm not like that was never my intention to have this debate about. Yeah, it's actually the ridge, isn't it?
Yeah, the mountain.
Between
Oh, it's actually-
Waikato and something like that.
It's
just
Moaka
before-
Tino, it's just south of Mokai.
Just south of Moka.
Oh, south of, yeah, okay. Known for White Lake, yeah. Okay. Well, is that, so, but going, rather than having an argument about where they might be, you know, actual physical place they might be residing, is that, you know, what do you think the impact of that could be?
As regions go, this is a compact region, I think. Steve made the comment at the start of the meeting when presenting, speaking to one of the other maps on this presentation. It's as compact region as exists in New Zealand. The accessibility issue around the region is as good as anywhere. That's the point that Steve was making.
Yes, but there's, yeah, well, until now, of course, apart from the chair, which is not an electoral position, but it's an elected position, the others all have just part of the block, don't they? Doesn't matter whether you're talking about Canterbury or Northland or Taranaki.
So I'm just going to go over
Yeah.
to EJ and Donald. Is there anything from a technical point of view that we have not asked the question of that you would like to ask directly to the council? No, you're comfortable? Okay, well, I'm going to thank everyone for their attendance today, and thank you. You know, it's always a difficult situation, these hearings, and I really appreciate the fact that you've prepared well, you've answered our questions very effectively. It was great to see the appellants as well, so that they could give us more information that we could ask of you. And I just want to say thank you very much. It's been lovely being with you today, and we appreciate your time and your passion for your region. Thank you. Final closing with prayer.
Kia wātea, kia mama tēnā, e te tiana, te wairua i te hata takatu. Koe rā, whakaira, kia wātea, kia wātea, kia wātea. Māori. I've got one more question here. Tell us about the beautiful windows, and it's quite, you know, it's an amazing sort of bit of design. But what are they telling us? What's the story?
There's two fantastic pieces of art in this room. One is the stained glass thing that goes back to this building is the former site is the former site of the Stratford Dairy Factory. Recycling at its best was converted into the offices of the retail catchment commission in the late 80s. That piece of artwork is depicting the land with the stripes, the yellow and green and grey, the centre of our region.
Yep.
And the sea there. What you can't see, because we've got it tucked away. Thank you, Elvisa.
Wow.
It's a fantastic.
Wow. It doesn't like being pulled out, does it?
It's quite heavy. Well, leave it there anyway. There's a fantastic piece of artwork commissioned by the council, local artist Randy Kipper did that work when we.
Oh, that's it there.
When we redeveloped this this room 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's depicting, and the story's up on the wall there, but it's depicting all those components of Taranaki as to who we are, what's important to us, and yeah, it's a beautiful piece of art. But unfortunately for today, it's locked away.
Yeah. It'd be good to get the final report, wouldn't it? You know, the final.
Before everyone leaves,